but it's like, going through a heartbreak. Like, you kind of accepted it already, but you're still going through the phases. It's liberating, of course. It's very liberating. But of course, with every detachment, there's also that pain.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 43. My guest today was raised in the Philippines and was baptized Roman Catholic as a young child. I learned some interesting things about Catholicism in this interview. Having come from an evangelical Christian background, it's always interesting to me to learn these things. So he talks about a few of those differences, and then he talks about his love for science at a young age and how the Catholic Church kind of views science. And it's very different from, I think, how many conservative Christian denominations view science. At one point, he says the phrase that it's not religion that's bad, but it's religious thinking. And I really love that. And he talks about that a little bit more and elaborates on that later in the interview. He mentions a great article from Chris Stedman of Vice. He is part of the Filipino Freethinkers group, and I will leave links to that and to his website in the show notes. I loved his sense of humor and his insight. Without further ado, here's my interview with Rick Caliolio. Okay, well, I am happy to be with Rick Caliolio today. He's joining me on the Voices of Deconversion podcast. Rick, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me too. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our listeners.
Yeah. Well, so I always start out just asking, how do you identify as, if someone were to say, are you an atheist, agnostic, or is there another term that you prefer using?
If it's just a casual conversation or maybe a government forum, I just say irreligious. I prefer saying irreligious because I think somehow it has a kind of mystique. You really don't know when someone is irreligious because maybe he still believes in a God or not. He just doesn't have religion right now.
Yeah.
But if for a more serious conversation, like really, really pointing out how I really identify, I would say stick with agnostic atheist. So are you familiar with this quadrant? With this quadrant, like in this corner, this is the Gnostic theist, in this corner, this agnostic theist, and this agnostic atheist, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm identifying on the side of agnostic atheist. So that is like, I am agnostic in terms of knowledge. So I really cannot say I have no final conclusion if there's a God or not. But I live my life as if there's none. So that's the atheist part.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's a popular response too, and I've kind of adopted that as I think how I personally would identify too. I think I tell people I'm an atheist, but I think if someone drilled down, I would probably say, well, yeah, technically agnostic atheist. I think that's a good phrase. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, tell me about kind of how Christianity influenced your childhood as you were growing up.
I was born, baptized, Roman Catholic in the Philippines. The family technically is Roman Catholic, but I would say only my mother is the more religious parent. So my father is, but in paper, he's Catholic. We have an altar at home. I think it's something common for Catholics. I'm not sure in the U.S. or other parts of the world, but in the Philippines, it's quite common to have altars, small altars. So basically, it's just a small table in the corner with picture of Jesus or some saint that you like. So we have that. My father kind of maintains that, but he doesn't really go to the church with us every Sunday. So every Sunday, it's only my mother, me, and my siblings go to the church regularly. So sometimes it's a Sunday or sometimes it's a Saturday, which they call the anticipated mass. And then my father will just usually join. I think when I was younger, he will join during Christmas mass. So basically the 24th, the evening of the 24th. So he will join that mass. So usually that's the only day he will join us.
Did you say anticipated mass earlier?
Yeah. It's commandment is the Sabbath day, at least for Catholics, is the Sunday.
Oh,
So it's that's the if you cannot. So ideally, of course, you go to church every day, or if you cannot, at least on a Sunday.
so the expectation was that you, like, if you were a really devout Catholic, you would go every day.
Kind of, yeah,
Wow. Did you know
yeah.
people who did that?
Well, I would say the lay ministers, they call it, because they're really helping out in the church. Those who are really active in the church activities, church community, because it's unlike the Christian. We in the Philippines we call them born again Christians or other Christian denominations
Yeah.
outside the Catholic. We just call them like a born again Christian or just Christian in general.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman Catholic community is not really that tight knit. I mean, unlike in other Christian
Hmm.
sects or denominations, you are kind of required to join the community.
Okay.
So, but in the Catholic Church, it's not really, but there are some who are really very active there.
Okay.
So I would assume that these families are more often than not, well, not really, maybe not really every day, but maybe most of their week they spend in the church.
So there's a good number of people that you knew growing up who would go every day.
I would not say I know them, but I
Know of
see that
them.
we're not really a big part of the community, maybe except for my sister, who was a member of the choir.
Okay.
So she would have, so aside from the church, she would have once or twice a week practice with the choir. So, but
Okay.
for me, I'm kind of a loner. I'm kind of what they call this introvert when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So not really a big part of the community.
Okay.
So going back to the anticipated mass.
Yes.
So as I mentioned, ideally you go to church on a Sunday, but some people it's not possible. So there are masses on a Saturday. Sometimes it's in a mall. So this is for me when I first really thought about it. It's quite funny because it kind of became a consumerist activity because it's in a mall. So the malls will provide masses on a Saturday,
That's so
and it's called
funny.
yeah, it's called an anticipated mass because you're basically holding the mass for Sunday on a Saturday. So the difference is that you have a different because every day you have a different first reading, you have a different second reading, you have a different gospel. So you're gonna on a Saturday mass, you're gonna read the first reading, the second reading, and the gospel for the Sunday. So yeah,
Interesting.
you're anticipating the Sunday mass.
Okay. So it's usually a Saturday mass, is what you said. Is what?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
maybe when we were younger, Sunday, but when we're getting a little bit older, we'll spend time on a Saturday in the malls. It's quite popular in the Philippines. We have a lot of big malls for a very small metropolitan area. We have a lot of big malls,
That's funny.
and so we will just before we spend the time in the mall, we will go to the church there. Well, that's not a church; it's a chapel, and then hear the anticipated mass.
Okay. So you were
Yeah,
saying that your mom was more religious growing up, and your dad, he didn't go every Sunday. Um,
he didn't go every Sunday. He didn't
okay.
go any Sunday, I think.
What was your involvement in church when you were younger? Were you said you were kind of a loner, like introvert type, so you didn't
Yeah,
maybe get involved in community stuff as much, but were you
yes,
involved in any fashion, involved in any
yeah,
way?
of course. People know us. Well, not everyone, of course, but we have friends there. Sometimes I would I think it was a World Youth Day celebration, and everyone who read the first reading, the second reading are children, or not children, at least teens, and I was called to read the first reading, and yeah, that's it. And maybe probably I have what do you call this? Because I went to a Catholic school, so my high school is in a
Okay.
Catholic school, and got involved a few times, but it's more really like a requirement to get involved in church, quote unquote, church activities within the school.
Okay. So yeah, you went to a Catholic school, and then you would do the first reading from time to time.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, as I said, it's at least on our family side, we're not really that big on the community of the church, because I'm not sure right now if it's still popular, but back then in the late 90s, early 2000s, we have this Couples for Christ. So some Catholic couples get together for Bible study outside the mass. My parents didn't join that. And then the equivalent for that for teenagers and children are Youth for Christ. I didn't join that also. So I'm really big in the community thing, but I would say that even if that's not the case, I would say it's still a big part of me, because it's still in the
Yeah.
center of how, at least on my personal world outlook or worldview.
It was a big part of like how you understood the world.
Yes, exactly.
And as far as I came from more of a evangelical conservative Christian background, that's kind of what my background was. So a lot of times we would talk about having a personal relationship with God. And I know Catholics, sometimes talk like that, but is that how you thought of how you interacted with God? Was it like a personal relationship, or how would you have described it?
Yes, actually, I think that would be the best description of how I interacted with the church, or actually kind of separate the God and the church. Even in Roman Catholics, with Roman Catholics, some Roman Catholics kind of does that, separating the church from God. Especially nowadays that priests are what you call this, getting involved in scandals.
Oh yeah.
So one of the most convenient excuses there is that the church is actually separate from God, so something like that. So to kind of keep you believing in God, so they kind of separate it. So for me, I kind of have had a more personal relationship with God, in a way that when I was younger, of course, I believed in the guardian angel, for example. Do you have that in evangelical Christianity?
Yeah, a guardian angel.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. So you also
my
have that.
my mom told us about that when we were little, and I always, as a young boy, would like imagine a guardian like angel like standing by my doorway, like protecting me from any demons or
Hmm.
anything. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes. So we also had that, but I think what you don't have are saints, right?
correct.
Yeah. So we had saints. So some people kind of believe in strongly believe in their guardian angel. Some people believe or rely on a certain saint to protect them. Or there are some group that are really devoted to the Virgin Mary.
Mm.
So for me, what I realized later on is that if God is everywhere, if God is really in control and He has eyes everywhere, He's actually there in the corner watching us, He's up there watching us. Why do I need these other things for? Why do I need the intercession of Mary? Why do I need the intercession of saints? Why do I need the guardian angel? Why do I need even Jesus? Why do I need Him? So I would say that when I pray when I was younger, I feel like I'm just really just talking directly to Him.
Okay.
So, or her, whatever. We don't know.
So it was very personal. It was your direct relationship with
Yes,
God, and that was the most important
yeah,
part of your faith.
yes,
Not necessarily,
yeah,
these saints or things like that.
yeah.
Well, as you grew older, how did your relationship with God or your faith change or develop?
hmm hmm I would say it became quite confused. It was a confused faith, or at least the tenets, the way I see them, the way I believe them, quite confused. But to mitigate the confusion, I kind of have this personal mental gymnastics to justify everything. So the confusion actually stems also from. Are you familiar with homilies or the sermons? So we
Homily.
call it
Yeah.
yeah. So the sermons. It's weird because a lot of priests kind of contradict each other. So, for example, the best example that I thought of is the communion. So the question is, when can you receive the communion, so the body of Christ, the bread? Is it, should you be pure of sin? So you should have confessed before getting the communion so that you're free from sin, at least for a few days?
Yeah.
Or is it okay? Is it better that you have the body of Christ inside you, even if you're sinful? So at least you have something to fight the sin. So the opinion there is very different. Some priests will say you should not take the body of Christ if you're sinful, you haven't confessed. Some priests will say that it's okay, it's better actually, because it's kind of letting God in you even if you're sinful. So something like that. So even in school, since I went to Catholic Church, we have a religion class. The teachers different teachers would say different things.
Yeah.
So that's just one thing. So that's just one thing that kind of made me confused. So I was so in those kinds of things, I just made up my mind on my own, like what do I need to believe in. And another thing is, for example, science. I really loved science. I'm not a top performer in school, but I can remember that the only subject in my 4 years in high school is that I have a high score. It will be, well, aside from computer, it will be biology. And I really love biology. I really love evolution. I once had this research that I reported in the class about dinosaurs and evolution.
Ooh, cool.
So I learned about the Big Bang Theory, the evolution in millions of years, and traditionally, unlike the Christian and other Christian sects, in the Catholic Church, science is not really that rebuffed because we have a lot of priests, scientists. So science is kind of accepted in the church. And
Cool.
so I was kind of confused. How do I reconcile the Genesis with evolution? So I kind of made up my own mind, my own mental gymnastics. Maybe that one day per day in the week that God created the universe is actually millions of years in our time. So it's like that joke. It's like that joke. For God, $1 million is just $1. A million years is just 1 second. And you said, okay, God, can you give me $1? And he said, just a sec.
Yeah. That's funny. I've never
So,
heard that joke before.
so it's kind of, so I was thinking maybe it's kind of like that. For God, it's just one day, but for
Yeah.
us, that. So that's how I kind of mitigated my confusion. But looking back now, I would say it's not like Jehovah's Witnesses or the Westboro Baptist that they have these strict tenets that you need to, you cannot masturbate, you cannot wear this, you cannot wear that. So we don't have that actually.
Yeah. Well, and then so this was, I'm guessing that you learned about evolution and biology and stuff in high school.
Yes, in high school, yeah.
Yeah, and because it's a Catholic high school and Catholics aren't as strict necessarily with, being against science and things like that, you were able to kind of explore that part of
Yes,
your education more than maybe like
yes.
I was, because I was fundamentalist and that was kind of a no-no, like evolution was just not true, and I didn't even think about it because it wasn't true. That's
Yes.
that's kind of nice that you had that to explore and learn. But like you said, because you're Catholic and that's not a problem, probably I'm guessing, you can tell me if I'm wrong, it didn't really challenge your faith too much, or was
Yes,
there anything
yes.
about what you were learning that caused you to kind of pause and go,
I would say actually it's not the science that challenged my faith, because it's actually an advantage of, I mean, maybe if other Christian sects will look at the Catholics and the Catholic doctrine and how they say it's so liberal. I'm not sure. Did you see Catholics that way before?
yeah,
They were, I mean, I assume that most Christians will see Catholics as a little bit more liberal than other Christian sects. And I think it's a strength for keeping membership, because if you're confused, you can just make up your mind on your own and just still justify staying in the church.
yeah,
So for me, that's the way I see it. Why did I? I mean, it's not the science that actually made me question the faith, because it's kind of very moldable. What's the malleable based on your own perception.
yeah.
So as I said, yeah, there's actually an official name for that. The Genesis, reconciling the Genesis and
And
evolution.
what are you? So I think, what are you getting at? Maybe how, like, a lot of liberal Christians or Catholics view evolution as like it's guided by God, like God guided the
Yes,
evolution process.
yes,
Okay, yeah.
yes. Theistic evolution. So
Ah,
the theistic evolution theory. So they say, yeah, the evolution is true, the way scientists explain it, the way the process works is true, but it's actually with the hands of God. Yeah. So that's it.
cool.
So that's how I see it. So that's how I was able to keep my interest in science and my, what they call this, my curiosity, was able to feed it, but at the same time, it doesn't really shook my faith.
Yeah.
So so funny enough is that I I w- looking back now, I wanted to be more fundamental actually. So
Fundamental,
I
like
was
fundamentalist, or fundamental in a different way.
yeah, fundamental, like a more fundamentalist. So but I didn't know it that time, that term, or it's how people see it. But that's what I wanted. I want to get back to the roots,
Hmm.
let's say, because the church is telling us to do this, to do this, to do that, which is basically their interpretation of the Bible. And I said,
Yeah.
hold on, I want to go back to the roots. I want to go back to the Bible. I mean, for example, in the Catholic Church, you can go to the church with anything that you wear, so something like that. So,
Hmm.
being conservative, I was like, why are these women wearing short skirts, spaghetti straps in the church? But why in this other Christian church, I think they're dressing more proper. So I was thinking of that. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And I was saying, and then going back to the confusion, I was thinking why some people are saying this, some people are saying that. So what is it really? So I said, I want to go back to the roots and go back to what actually the Bible says.
Up to this point, what else was significant? Now, how old were you when you started to have these questions, I guess?
Oh, actually, well, I would say the questions have been there all along. The questions have been there all along since I was a child. I remember this one time I saw this really looking at it now. It was really a really great sculpture, the crucifixion, Jesus nailed on the cross. Because when I was a child, I was afraid of it. Because it's really, you can really see the face. You can really see he's in pain, the blood dripping from his face, from his nose. And then when I was a child, I told my mom that this is frightening. I was afraid of it, and he said, "Only the devil is afraid of the cross." And she said that, and I was like, "Okay." And looking at back now, I mean, it's really should be really meant to be fearsome, I think, because it's a torture device. When you think about it,
Authoritarian device?
torture.
Oh, torture device. Sorry. Yeah. No, you're
Yeah,
right. It totally was. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I would be surprised if a child is not afraid of that specific sculpture, because this one is really, well, not really realistic, but this is really well made. The color of the flesh is really right, the color of the blood. So I appreciate now that I'm adult, but I won't be surprised if children will be really afraid of it.
Right.
So those kinds of questions, like, okay, so am I bad for being afraid of that, or something like that? So all those confusion about the communion. So the questions are really there, but as I said, you kind of build up defenses against that, or mental
Yeah.
loops, mental gymnastics. Now, when did it
Well, when did you
exactly?
start having these? When did you start feeling like you wanted to get back to the fundamentals of Catholicism?
Okay.
Yeah.
It will be uh, around 2011, I think, or 2010. 2010,
Not too long ago.
not too long ago, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So it's not really questioning the faith, but questioning the Catholic doctrine. And
Okay.
I actually wanted to be more Christian. So that's what I said. I wanted to be more Christian than these Catholics.
And I'm excited to get into that and find out how that developed for you, because that's really interesting how
Mm,
this the desire to get to the fundamentals of the faith and to really get to like true Christianity and really kind of
yes.
kind of toss aside anything that maybe was tradition or not really true Christianity. It's
Yes.
interesting that that is what led you eventually away from the church. That's interesting to me.
Mm,
So before we
yeah.
get into that,
Mhm.
up to this point in your life, what else was significant?
In terms of faith, I would say nothing really.
Okay.
I would say nothing really. It's your generic boring Catholic life. Go to school, graduate, have a job,
Okay.
provide for the family. When I say provide for the family, I didn't have wife and kids, but because in the Philippines, it's quite a little bit. Well, it's not a little bit, but it's quite expected that you at least give back to your parents who paid for your school
Hmm.
when you have work. So it's basically just that.
Okay.
So still going to the church every Sunday or Saturday for the anticipated mass. So
Okay.
nothing really special.
Nothing else stands out. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, let's get into this process or this journey that you were gonna kind of go on. Discovering the fundamentals of the faith. So, what types of, I guess, where did you go from there?
Well, of course, I started really reading the Bible. I was not able to finish it because looking at it now as a work of fiction, it's a really shitty work of fiction. I mean, if you're a book critic, or maybe like a film critic applying it on storytelling and books, it was really badly told, the story there in the Bible. So it cannot keep me what do you call this,
Entertained, interested.
entertained, except for, which is actually maybe something significant that I should have remembered is, except for the Book of Revelations.
Oh yeah.
That thing is really, really exciting. I think I've read it three times or four times.
Wow.
Once when I was around less than 15 years old, another when I was between 15 to 20 years old, and one more time, I forgot when. I actually even kind of thought about writing a adaptation, something like, what if the imagery here is in the year 3000, where it's actually the beast is actually a high-tech ship that's killing all the people, so something like that. So it's a
Yeah.
technological Armageddon, something like that. So it was really exciting for me, and maybe I think that's one of the things that kind of, because that thing is not really much talked about in the Catholic Church, the Armageddon, the Doomsday.
Oh, the Armageddon, the end times, that's not a big focus
Yeah,
in Catholicism.
at least in the Philippines. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, even when I was a Catholic, even as a Catholic, I find these predictions that on this day in the year 2006, the rapture will come. It's for me, even as a Catholic, it's quite funny. Maybe
It
because
is
it's because
funny.
of that we didn't. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Of course, it's funny, but when thinking back, why didn't I find it? Why didn't I took it? Why didn't I take it seriously when I was still a Christian? Maybe because Catholics didn't really put much focus on that, on the revelations, and then maybe that's one of the triggers, is that when I started really enjoying the revelations, reading the revelations, and I said, and I questioned that,
Yeah.
and said, what else? What else is the Catholic Church ignoring?
Interesting.
So that's when I started to try to go more fundamental, go back to the roots, and read the Bible, which is, I salute those who can read the Bible from end to end, because it's really boring.
Yeah. That's very true.
uh, yeah, so I just went to blogs, uh, and then later on YouTube, and then
Okay.
one channel and series of videos really stood out for me, is this World's Last Chance. That's the name of the channel in YouTube. It's World's Last Chance.
Hmm.
So it's around 2010. So I think YouTube is not really that big yet. But they had these videos. They're Christian, but they're criticizing Christmas. So they know about Christmas being coming from Saturnalia. So they didn't like the celebration of Christmas.
Hmm.
Uh, the Gregorian calendar is actually kind of heresy, because in the Old Testament, God gave us this calendar based on lunar days, I think. And I said, this makes sense. I mean, if God is Alpha and Omega, He's never ending, and a few thousand years is just a snap of a finger for God. Why would there be a change in the calendar if He said in the Old Testament that should be how you track days? This is how you should track days.
Yeah, you're noticing the
What is,
contradictions.
yeah, and why did we change it? So I said, okay, so there's really something weird with the Catholic Church. And then I this when I learned about the Council of Nicaea, so something like that. So it's actually at first the Catholic Church that fell down for me, that broke down for me.
Hmm. It
And
was actually like learning about the calendar that was kind of significant for you.
yes, actually that the calendar and Saturnalia, the celebration of Christmas.
Oh, what? So you call it Saturnalia?
Saturnalia, yeah. It's actually a Roman from Saturn.
Oh, Saturn, right. I actually had
Yeah.
never heard
So
that, but yeah, that makes sense. It's
yeah.
Saturnalia. Okay. Interesting. So
So
that's where Christmas came. I knew Christmas was like Christians had adopted pagan imagery, but I didn't
yeah,
know
yeah,
anything about
the
Saturnalia. So
exact name.
that's interesting.
Yes. So So this is the pagan tradition that they got it from, because it's basically when you're trying to occupy. I also like to read history, so I know this also from reading history, is that when you're trying to occupy a land, a country, if you're an empire, if you really want them to adopt your traditions, your culture, you mix it in with their current traditions and cultures.
Yeah.
So for
That's really smart.
the Catholic tradition in the Philippines is not the same as the Catholic tradition in Mexico. And when you look into history, we can trace the Catholic traditions in the Philippines to the our ancestor worship traditions pre-Spanish times. So there's a similarity with how Filipinos worship their ancestors, and now how they worship saints in the Philippines.
It was kind of a transition. Like it would be a sort of a smooth transition from ancestor worship to saint worship in a way.
Yes, that's how they strategize spreading Catholicism or Christianity. So in terms of Christmas, so that's how it started, because they already have this year-end drunk craze celebration of Saturnalia, and they just added the birth of Jesus Christ there.
Wow.
So yeah.
What's interesting to me is it's really smart to adapt it to like the indigenous cultures that you're trying to spread the faith to. But while doing that, like the big picture, if you can see all these different types of Christianity, then it starts to make you question the actual truth of the traditions in Christianity, because there's so many versions of it. There's no one pure version anywhere. It's all adapted, like you said, to the Philippines when it's in the Philippines, or Mexico when it's in Mexico, you know?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I just remembered, a kind of segue, but I just remembered that Mexicans have this Day of the Dead celebration. What is that in Spanish?
Oh, I forget the name, but yes, Day of the Dead.
Días de las Muertas, something like that.
Okay.
So it's a really colorful, when I'm looking at it in videos, it's a really colorful celebration. It's actually a traditional indigenous Mexican tradition, but now it's mixed with Catholicism.
Yeah. It's just become part of, Catholicism's kind of mixed in with it now.
Yeah, Días de los Muertos. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so going on from there, so you're starting to notice all of this, and what else are you learning at this time?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, actually, it's actually the Catholic Church that broke that for me first, and you mentioned earlier that if there's a different varieties of Christianity, people tend to notice. But actually, I would say that's only true for Catholic, because Catholic is supposed to be this one big sect. But if you're a smaller sect, you can just get away with thinking that, oh, they're wrong, we're right, something like that.
Yeah.
But if you're a Catholic, and even within the Catholic doctrine there are differences, then that's when you start really doubting the Catholic Church. So I was looking into that when I said I don't believe the Catholic Church anymore, but I still believed in God, I still believe in Jesus. So I said, what kind of Christian can I be? I said, I asked, and then I even took this kind of online personality quizzes, like what do you believe in, how important is it, and then what's funny is it always comes up Quaker.
Oh,
you are a Quaker. I only know Quaker as in the Quaker Oats cereal.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. No, that's all I knew until I got to Bible school like years later. And then I learned a little bit about the Quakers. I think they were actually quite liberal but yeah, I only
Yes,
knew it
yes,
as the oatmeal, so
yeah.
that's pretty funny.
So maybe that's why, because of course when I answer the questions, most of my principles or point of views are liberal. So maybe that's why they're telling me you're a Quaker. So
Yeah.
anyway, but it was that I was satisfied because there are no Quaker communities in the Philippines.
Well, yeah, there's barely any anywhere probably. I haven't, yeah.
So I
Kept discovering.
yeah, so I just kept on exploring, kept on reading until just through this reading, through this watching of videos, it came to my mind. So okay, since as I mentioned, I had a closer personal relationship with God directly, not
Hmm.
with the saints, not with Mary, a little bit, not even with Jesus. So I I asked the one of the ultimate questions: is Jesus a real person?
Hmm.
I mean, it's just in my mind. I didn't ask anyone. I didn't, and then of course with the power of the internet, I just Googled,
Yeah.
and then I read all of these actual historical documents, or at least reviews of those historical documents. Some videos. Of course, you have these conspiracy theories like uh, videos like the Jesus mythology is similar to this and that mythology, which is a little bit correct, but not 100%.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are similarities to the hero's journey, like the virgin birth, the rising after 3 days.
Yeah.
It's repetitive in many mythological hero stories, hero journeys.
Yeah.
So that's it. I tried to have as outside the Bible, where is the proof that Jesus existed? Especially, and it was really difficult to find, especially that the Shroud of Turin was what do you call this? A fraud. Yeah. This is where my belief in science, well, not it's not a belief, but trust in science, in the scientific thinking, helped me because they proved it through the use of carbon dating, which is have been proven to be quite accurate.
Wow. That's really cool. Actually, I kind of think that's neat. A neat development
Yeah.
in your journey away from Christianity is that science kind of came
Mm.
in and proved this thing wrong, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I can trust
Yeah.
science. Maybe I can't trust faith as much.
Yeah. So, I mean, I said faith is just blind following or blind faith in this one book, the
Hmm.
Bible, while science is you weigh everything, you take the real data that you have and try to analyze it. So
Yeah.
during that time, I'm really more what do you call this?
Skeptical.
Yeah, skeptical, and I'm really more trusting on the scientific method
Okay.
than on the faith side, because I said, uh, because I just remember that when I was still pure Catholic, I said, well, God and Jesus is true, then if we have nothing to worry because science will just prove that. That's
Yeah.
what I kind of said. Maybe not now, but maybe in the future. So that's how I kind of get away with it. But there's this little thing in me that still science weighs more
Yeah.
than faith or something like that. So it came helpful during that time when I was asking if Jesus is he real? So I tried reading actual historical research, and they cannot prove it because as outside the Bible there are no other physical what do you call this,
Like documents, writings.
documents, writings, yeah. And for example, Dead Sea Scrolls, they tried to hush that because I think it has contradictions with the Catholic Bible.
It
I'm not sure if you read.
definitely, if I, and I'm going to mess this up, but what I think it had contradictions with the King James, because the
Yes.
documents that the King James was based on are actually like more recent. than the
Yes.
writings that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, so then they could
Dead Sea
compare
Scrolls.
them and see they had changed over time.
Yes.
That was a big deal to me when I learned that.
Yes. So I learned that they left it out because it has actually has contradictions, and then there's this theory that is actually more historians are agreeing upon, is that maybe Jesus is actually many preachers rolled into one.
Oh. Yeah,
So
there's some. That's an
maybe,
interesting theory. Yeah, there's some really interesting
yeah,
theories about Jesus' life, and like you said, we don't know necessarily too much
yeah.
outside of the Bible. But go ahead. I interrupted.
No, no worries, no worries. This is a conversation, so
Yeah,
it's
no,
okay.
I know. I say this like every interview, but I'll cut in and I'll be like, "Oh, sorry, I'm talking too much," But I try to not interject too many times. But yeah,
So I said, "Oh shit." There is no actual evidence of Jesus Christ, I said. And we only have this book, right?
yeah,
And so the scientific part of my mind is going haywire. Like, I believe this for so many years, but the scientific part of my mind is saying no. There's no evidence. There's no other, aside from this book, there's no other evidence, which is not enough.
how did you feel in that moment when you realized that? Like, what was rushing through your mind when you realized, oh my gosh, there's no evidence for this?
Everything that I watched and read, I had to rewatch it, reread it, and go back to the memories that I had, and like it's kind of like your life flashing in front of your eyes for many days because you're thinking all those things that happened and how you attributed it to the work of a higher being,
Yeah.
and you suddenly have you seen this movie with the guy who's wearing sunglasses, and then when he wears that glasses he will see the aliens disguised as men. It's
No.
actually in a black and white, and then when he removes it he sees them as normal people. So when he
Interesting.
will look at the newspaper and he puts on the sunglasses, he will see the actual message, something like, "Oh, we're just controlling you," something like that. So it's kind of felt like that way, like I'm looking at things differently.
Yeah.
So it's kind of overwhelming at first. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's such a monumental shift in how you've seen the world that I'm
yes,
imagining you having to go back and okay, let me make sure that I'm understanding this right because this is a big change.
yes, that's right, that's right. And actually, after that, of course, there's this short period of like, okay, so maybe Jesus is not real, but maybe there's still a God. I was studying these things about deism, pantheism, and all of these things, and
Yeah.
but the confusion just built, and there's really no final answer that I can find. So there was this still a few days, or a few weeks, or maybe little few months that I still believed in God, but not in the Catholic Church, not in Jesus anymore, so not a Christian anymore.
Yeah. You were transitioning
So
slowly away.
yeah, yeah,
I
and
definitely
then
went through a
yes,
phase like that too, where I looked into Buddhism a
yeah,
little bit. I thought about the
yeah,
deist
yeah, even
idea
that,
that God's making think like he started the process, but his hands are off, and it just like you said, it just becomes more confusing. It's kind of more of the
yes,
same.
yes, and you're going back again to this mental gymnastics that you did before for the Catholic for the previous doctrine that I had,
Yeah,
and I kind of like get tired of it. No, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore.
yeah. Well, did you tell anybody in your life, anyone that was close to you, that you were having these kinds of doubts and changing your opinions on things?
I had a girlfriend back then, and I didn't really tell her, and I only told her when I'm already an atheist.
Oh,
When I was during that time, because I'm a what do you call this? Maybe I'm a little bit stubborn myself, a little bit too independent, and I said, no one can help me. I can only help myself. So when I was in that doubting phase, I'm the only one going through it.
You got to figure it out on
I
your own,
didn't.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I said it to myself. They don't know. I mean, the people around me are not really hardcore Catholics. I mean, you can say hardcore Catholics, but it's different when you say hardcore Christian.
You,
It's
oh,
so it's
what's the difference? You mean the Catholics aren't as as hardcore as maybe like fundamentalist evangelical Christians,
yeah,
or
yeah.
okay,
They're
yeah,
not fundamentalists, but
they're
you really
devout.
cannot shake them.
They're devout in their own way, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, they're devout in their own way, but they're not fundamentalists, like violent, sometimes violent.
yeah, yeah.
so,
Okay, so you're kind of
so
keeping it to yourself for the most part.
yes, yes, I just
Interesting.
said, mhm.
Okay.
And I only told my then girlfriend that, uh, you know what, I'm an atheist. I don't believe anymore. And then when she was shocked, of course. And then I think I do not really remember who told my mom, but I think it was her who told my mom over lunch. Like,
Oh, so mom found out.
yeah,
She outed you to mom.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it was actually not that big of a deal, at least the way I see it, because I was already old. I mean, I'm 33 right now, 34, turning 34,
Okay.
and that was just a few years ago, 2010, 2011, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm already old, I'm already independent when I made that transition, and I'm seen as the smart boy in the family.
Hmm.
So maybe they kind of expected it in a way.
So what did your mom? What do you remember what your mom said when she found out?
Actually, I really cannot remember the exact words because it's not really that.
It
It's
wasn't like,
not angry. It's really neutral.
okay,
I know she's disappointed. I know, of course,
yeah.
but she's not angry. But I think even to the point that I, this is hazy. The memory is hazy,
Mm-hmm.
but I think she kind of expected it because I question everything even when I was a child. And I remember, I mean, something like I remember I mean, it's kind of a segue. I think it's somewhat related to Catholicism, that patriarchy perspective, because I remember asking everything and I remember my father being angry for asking a specific question like, why in the men's basketball there are no women coaches, but in the female basketball there are men coaches? And he was like, why are you asking these too many questions? So I mean, so they know that I asked too many questions, and maybe they kind of expected that.
That's hilarious, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great though. That's great that you had that inquisitive mind from a young age.
yeah.
Well, what was that whole process? What was most difficult, do you think, for you?
What was most difficult is really coming into terms. Back then, there was actually, I mean, before that transition, before that being an atheist, there was actually no one controlling the world for me, or at least controlling me, or at least controlling my immediate world. It's actually all me and everyone around me. So we're just
So is that scary to you?
not really scared, but kind of disappointed, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe I was thinking maybe I could have done more, maybe I could have really took control because the term is fatalism. So we most religious, at least in the Philippines, is that they kind of let go of things, just let God handle it.
Ah, that's a good phrase.
So
Fatalism. I like that.
yes, I
That
think
is
that's the
very. I
word.
think that's common in a lot of different versions of Christianity.
Yes.
People just let go and
So
let God.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Same idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So let Jesus take the wheel. Something.
There's a more modern one. That's good.
Yeah, yeah. So I, so
Jesus, take the
I,
wheel.
I was looking back there, and then like I was like, so it was not God then, it was me. I was like that, and then I remember this burning this book because I was reading this book, Chariot of the Gods. I'm not sure if you know this, but this is a book theorizing that maybe the Bible is actually a book about seeing aliens. So it's actually the aliens that's controlling, that is playing God during that time, and the imagery there in the Bible is actually are aliens, the alien ships, alien technology, and what do you call this? The Ark of the Covenant is actually a mini nuclear reactor that the aliens provided. So the reason that we when you open it, you die if you're not a priest, is because you don't know how to handle a nuclear reactor. So you need to be a certified nuclear engineer by the aliens before you can enter that tent with the Ark of the Covenant.
That's interesting. It's like a science fiction book.
Yeah, yeah, but actually they don't sell it like as a science fiction. It's a theory. It's. Do you know this History Channel show about aliens? That meme, aliens. That guy with this messy hair.
I don't think I have that channel because
Okay,
we have like basic cable.
okay.
But I know, but
But
I've
it's
seen the History Channel before though.
yeah. So they have this show related to that, which is thinking that what if actually aliens came here and influenced civilization in the early days, or something like that.
That's
So
interesting.
now, yeah. So when I was reading this, and I was like, oh man, this makes sense. I was really young back then, and I was like, I was feeling blasphemous because I said, because I was kind of believing this, and then few days after that, some things went wrong with life. Something like I failed an exam, I think. I had a fight with someone, or so I had a bad week,
Yeah.
and I attributed it to believing that book. So I was said maybe God is punishing me because I was believing that book. So I took the book and then throw it in the fire.
Wow.
So and then now that I'm an atheist, I was recalling that, oh shit, I mean, it's just a random coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's fast.
So,
It's I bet you it was fascinating for you to think back at different times like that in your life when you thought something totally different was happening or bigger or divine, and then you look back and go, "Oh,
yes,
yeah, that was just me." Okay.
that was just me. This was just the people around me.
So that
So
was
those are,
that
yeah.
was difficult for you to kind of come to terms with that.
Sorry.
That was difficult for you to come to terms with the idea that God's not in
Not really,
control.
not really difficult, but it's like, going through a heartbreak. Like you kind of accepted it already, but you're still going through the phases.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of for me it was kind of a they talk about the five stages of grief. You know,
Yes.
it was a grieving process in a sense
Yes.
of like losing what I had once known or understood, and so it was kind of a transition like that for me. Maybe it was sort of similar in that sense that you were kind of like you said heartbreak. You know.
Yes. That's how I really saw it. It was really a heartbreak. It's like because it's a relationship, and everything revolved around it, or at the very least, it revolved around you,
Yeah.
and now you're getting out of it. It's liberating, of course. Of course, it's very liberating, but of course, with every detachment, there's also that pain.
That's really true. That's a really good point. It's liberating,
Yeah.
but there's also the pain that comes with any change in life.
Yes. Yes.
That's
That's it.
really good insight. I like that.
Mhm.
Well, I'm going to kind of ask you some questions like to reflect
Mhm.
on, as we kind of wrap up here. When you think back on maybe the most Christian version of yourself, what do you think about that person now that you're an agnostic atheist?
Because I was not really a pushover, but in some ways, I was letting the world happen around me on its own. I did not try my best to influence it because yeah, as we mentioned, most of the time we just let go and let God. If this thing happened, it's because God. That's what God wanted. So that's that's how I see myself when I was still a Christian. Is that I didn't take control of my life as much as I need or want to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well,
Mm.
what's something that you've learned or experienced that maybe you wouldn't have if you were still a
Okay.
Catholic?
Actually, that would be kind of the answer to that way I look at myself is that I would say I was able to really take grasp of this self-determination thing. Like I wanted to do something, of course, with being pragmatic, with all the knowing the possibilities, knowing what I can and I cannot. But at the same time, I'm not just letting the world happen around me. I'm determining what do I want to do, what can I do, and then follow through it. So, for example, I said, let's go to Germany. Now we're here.
That's cool. Well, what made you
So,
decide to move to Germany?
well, primarily it's actually the change. I'm not sure if you read about it, but the change of government in the Philippines. But I think it's not really the change of the government, but more of the what it revealed about the Philippines.
Hmm. I know.
So
I mean, I read the other day that I saw a picture of the president or prime minister or whatever kissing some married woman on stage, but I didn't really
mm,
read too much about it. I don't really know much about the
yeah,
guy, but
but it's more than that. I mean, I didn't actually gave that issue much thought because
it's just a
he's actually more than that.
sensationalism, yeah, or whatever.
Yeah,
But
it's actually more than that because I'm not sure if there's this issue of Time magazine about the rise of the strong man, and he's one of those in the cover
oh,
picture, along with Vladimir Putin, Erdogan.
there's a guy in Italy who apparently is a real right wing guy, and then of course Trump,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it does seem
So
like
you
the
get
world
the
is
picture.
kind of
Yeah,
going that way. So anyway, so
yeah,
that's why you were kind of
yeah.
seeing like the culture was getting more like extremist maybe or more hard like maybe that's too strong of a
Yes.
word, but
No, yeah. Actually, you can say that a little bit more indifferent to human rights, something like, or to the general, yeah, indifference to humanity. I mean, even because as I said, it's not really just the government that what I think the majority is what that government revealed how most of the Philippines actually think.
wow. And
So
yeah. So that's troubling to you if you're living there because you're thinking, well, I'm
yes,
a real, I'm an agnostic atheist and I'm not Catholic like most of my neighbors and
yeah,
that might be a problem.
yeah. Actually, it's a good. Actually, I have an insight related to that. I stopped being kind of a militant atheist, going against, oh, your religion is false, you're stupid, something like that.
Mhm.
I used to be that. I realized later on that it's not actually religion that is bad, but it's religious thinking
Yeah, that's a great
because
point.
because for example, I had a lot of friends who are atheists. Some are not friends, just acquaintances in the organization. Uh, but I was surprised. I thought they were, in a way, humanists, but they supported Duterte's bloody policies,
Hmm.
and they're okay with it, or maybe not okay with it, but they kind of defending it, rationalizing it. So it's kind of like a religion, you know.
Yeah.
You know the religion is doing something bad, but you kind of rationalize it. And them atheists kind of do the same, but in politics,
Yeah.
in social political policies. So
You
I
can
said it's
be.
not really
Yeah, it's not. Go ahead. It's not really the religion.
the religion, it's the religious thinking, because there are a lot of religious who were going against him because he's violating human rights,
Yeah.
which I was thinking before it would be the atheists who will be in the forefront of that fight, because we kind of like to have the card that, oh, you cannot persecute me for being an atheist because I have my human rights, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking that they will be the ones to, but looking at it now, it's just a balance. As as much percentage of atheists are supporting this regime as much as the religious. So I mean, sorry, I'm phrasing it wrong, but the percentage of supporting the regime and the percentage of criticizing or going against the regime in the atheist community or the atheist circle is just the same in the religious circle. So it's not really the
Yeah. You're
religion.
saying prestige,
No, no, that the prestige, the percentage,
percentage. Sorry,
the percentage, yeah.
I was mishearing that. The
No
person.
worries. I might be pronouncing a lot of words wrong. I'm not English is not my first language.
Yeah, but you're doing great. I mean, you know. Um. So I think kind of what I'm hearing is like you've noticed that you can be a militant Christian or you can be a militant
I
atheist. You can be a
I
fundamentalist
used to be a
Christian.
militant. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Sorry. Go ahead. I think it's a
yeah,
different
no,
topic. Sorry.
I'm repeating basically what you just said, but like I like the point that it's not religion that's bad, it's religious thinking.
Yes.
And the way I kind of interpret that is like, you know, the bad thing about religion is when it's so rigid and it's not empathetic and it doesn't follow facts.
Yes.
But atheists can
Yes.
be just
Yes.
that bad. Atheists cannot follow
Exactly.
facts,
Exactly.
and they can be militant and, you know, cause lots of bad things. You know, they can cause bloody revolts and just as much as
Exactly.
a fundamentalist Muslim or Christian
Mm.
could. You know,
Yes.
yeah,
There's something related to. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Chris Stedman. Yeah, he wrote this article in Vice that was kind of caused a stir. It's about how atheist organizations are actually not voicing what do you call this, condemning enough the presence of quote unquote humanists in the far right, or the what's the term, the alt right.
the alt right. Yeah, they're not
Yes.
so they're not like opposing it enough.
Yes. Actually, they're kind of what they call this, neutral. They're not saying they're with them. They're not saying they're against them. But uh, Chris Stedman believes, which I also agree, is that as organizations, they have the influence, and we think that they have the responsibility to do that, to rebuke that.
Yeah, I actually pulled it up here. I googled it. Too many atheists are veering dangerously toward the alt right,
Yep,
and
that's it.
atheists can't afford to be quiet about it. That's the name of this
Yes,
article. That's
yes.
fascinating. I'll have to read this. That looks really interesting.
Yeah, which is actually because the phrase that I mentioned, that it's not actually religion that is bad, but it's religious thinking. I've thought about that 1 year or 2 years ago when Duterte came into power, and I said that some atheists here are being religious in their political stance. So I said, okay, it's not really religion.
Yeah,
That article kind of agrees with the same train of thought.
yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. Vice is really great. They've had some really great
Yeah.
reporting on, especially the alt right. You know, the racist right. You know, in America
Yes,
at least. Yeah, they've done a good job of
yes,
exposing that and showing it for what it
yeah,
is. Well,
That's actually where I learned in that article that there's actually a figure in the alt-right that identifies like as a humanist, which is weird.
wow. Yeah, it's so horrible when you hear that. Just think like, because yeah, like when you first become an atheist, you think, oh, we're liberal, progressive, empathetic to people's
Yes,
human rights,
yes.
and then you realize, no, not everyone. There's a lot of really
Not every.
horrible atheists out there.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, when you think back on this entire journey that you've taken from being raised Catholic, having a personal
Mm-hmm.
relationship with God, and seeing the world as controlled by God, to where you are now, where you see self determination and you're an agnostic
Mm-hmm.
atheist, that's a big change for anyone to make or to go through.
Mm-hmm.
What is something positive about yourself that you see that didn't change, that stayed the same through all of those
Mm.
years?
I would say it's the moral compass. What you call this for all the things negative about Christianity, or let's just focus on Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that they were able to build or to write a good moral compass. At least when you're looking at the perspective of not the modern times, but back in the day, maybe in the Middle Ages, it kind of makes sense. It's useful, and of course, it has its philosophical roots. So most of the moral compass I kept, especially that I really like this. In the Old Testament, you have the Ten Commandments, but Jesus was summarized it into just two. So I just took out the first one and just focus on the second one.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes, love your
The
neighbors as you
gold,
love yourself.
yeah, essentially the golden rule.
The golden
Yeah,
rule,
do
yeah.
unto others as you'd want them to do to you, kind of thing.
Yes. So maybe kind of I still keep that with me. Well, of course, except because they see like homophobia. They see it as a moral as a part of their moral compass. Of course, I remove those kinds of dirt,
Yeah,
so I just focus on what I think is really good, at least from my perspective.
that's good. Yeah, rid yourself of the bigotry, but what you can see in your life from the very beginning is that you've always believed in treating others well.
Yes, respect. Yes.
So there's someone who's listening to this podcast right now who's just deconverted. What kind of encouragement or piece of guidance would you give that person?
Okay. So it will be difficult because I've been involved with uh, IHEO, if you're not familiar with
Yeah,
that.
I interviewed
But,
someone who actually lives in Romania, and
okay.
he's younger, and he's a big part of IHEO. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So you have IHEU, which is International Humanist and Ethical Union, and then you have their youth organization, which is IHEO. So I was part of that for a few months, and I knew about different stories of deconversion in different places, so including in very religious extremist Muslim countries. So just as a disclaimer, while I do not have experience in those kinds of really difficult things, so this might not be applicable to them.
yeah. Well, but in my mind, you deconverted because you left Catholicism and you became an
Yes,
atheist agnostic. So the way I kind
yes,
of understand that is that's deconversion. So what I'm saying is like anyone who went from like Catholic to Christian
yes,
to atheist or agnostic or humanist or
yes,
whatever. Sometimes that can be a really hard transition for people. So I always like to ask my
yes,
guests, yeah, what kind of encouragement would you give someone who's just gone through that, who's maybe struggling or having a difficult time with it?
yes. Okay. Well, maybe a piece of advice is try not to focus on so much on others, like because usually when we become enlightened, quote unquote enlightened. We kind of try to force our own beliefs in others. For me, I would say instead of doing that, try to focus on yourself, try to focus on your improvement of yourself. And it might feel good to to just find someone to fight. If you really want that, then try to find a different fight that will be more meaningful. Like instead of fighting against religious people for them to prove if their God is true, for them to prove to ask them about the problem of evil, try to fight for, let's say, LGBT rights. Try to fight for human rights. Uh, Try to fight for example, in the Philippines, equal access to birth control. So actually, that is what the Filipino Free Thinkers is more focused on, at least as an active organization, which I like about them.
That's great.
So, so that's if you're a new, you just deconverted, you want to find someone to fight, then use that in a more meaningful, more productive way. Fight for LGBT rights, fight for civil rights, or if you really don't want that, try to look into improving yourself. Read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or whatever. Read Mark Manson, something like that. So, so that's it. Take
Yeah,
control of your life. Yeah.
that's great. Well, if you could think of, you've named actually a few resources, but if you could think of one resource to recommend to someone who's deconverting, or
Okay.
yeah, what would you recommend?
Okay. Uh, is it okay if I kind of give three, like
Yeah,
in a descending or
yep,
ascending order in terms of
yeah,
specificity?
that's fine.
So, if only one that is really general, I would say Google. For
Uh,
every question that you have, just Google it, because most probably someone already asked it. Someone is in your similar situation, and there's already an answer. Or if you cannot find that, try to find an online community. Well, the best is, of course, try to find a physical community. But if you cannot do that, try to find an online community. Talk with them. So, or
that's
if you just have questions, try to find the answers in Google.
that's
So
good.
that's first. And second will be philosophy. I would say philosophy, even if you do not need to go really deep into philosophy, just the introduction of philosophy of how, because that is one thing difficult when you're deconverting is arranging your train of thought, because you are used to this specific train of thought when you're religious, but the majority of the foundations now are broken, so you cannot.
Yeah,
It's really difficult to organize that.
yeah,
So I would suggest that philosophy is a great place to start to organize these questions, how to answer them or possible answers to them. So that would be the another thing.
yeah.
And then a more specific thing is maybe just a book on philosophy that is more general. Uh, I love this book, Sophie's World. It's actually a novel about a kid being taught by a creepy stranger. Actually, I mean, he's not a criminal or something, but the way it was told, it was like it's like a creepy stranger sending this little girl love notes, but it's actually a discussion of philosophy. A good introduction to each philosophical questions from the classic Greek philosophy to the more modern ones, and also this book Plato and the Platypus Walk into a Bar. So it's also introduction to different schools of thought in a more comedic way. It has more jokes. So there, and then just work on from there. If you find something interesting, then read on
That's awesome.
more.
Just keep learning.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you wanted to share?
You mentioned I can share about the group here, but actually it's not a group. As I said, the Filipino Freethinkers is. It's actually great that you were able to find that group, and you can find a lot of nice folks there, but also some not so nice. It's actually a mixture. It's a discussion forum for both religious and non-religious, as long as you agree with the rules. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, I will definitely put like a link to the Filipino Freethinkers.
Yeah.
I think they're on Twitter and Facebook and probably on some other platforms, but I'll put put
Yes,
those
yes.
links in the show notes to this episode so people can find them. And I mean, I just found it by using Facebook search, so it's pretty easy to find the group.
Yes.
And it's a big group. I was shocked. The page has like 80,000 followers on it, and then the group itself has 20,000.
Yes, because I think the page is especially large because primarily they really do not focus on just religious issues. They also
Like you said, they focus on LGBT rights, birth control
political,
issues.
yeah,
Yeah.
political issues also, social political issues.
And they seem fairly inclusive. Like, I think if I read on there, they're not like exclusive. And you just said this, I think. They're not exclusive to atheist or agnostic people. They're open to people who might be religious who want to have conversations.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's why they use the term free thinker.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of inclusive. And it doesn't mean you have to be non-religious, but it just means that you're thinking freely.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they'd like to connect?
Well, I have a website, so everything is there. My Twitter, my Instagram. I don't like using Facebook nowadays, so it's not there. But it also has my email. So if they want to contact me via email, it's there. So the website is riccalioliojr.com. So that's RICCALIOLIOJR.com.
Cool. So they can go there, and it sounds like they can get in touch with you in a variety of ways.
Yes, or not, or not,
Uh-huh.
or not if they just want to see the website. Well, it's actually I just wanted to document how I identify myself right now and how it came to be something like that, and a portfolio of my photographs because I'm a little bit aspiring to be a fine art photographer
Very
if
cool.
possible.
Very cool. I'll definitely check it out. That's neat.
Thank you.
Well, Rick, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your experience. I found it really fascinating, and I love hearing about experiences that are slightly different from mine because there's things that I learn every time and just find so interesting.
Yeah, me too, actually. Thank you very much. And I really love what you're doing, by the way. I've listened to few of your podcasts, and it's really nice. I agree that because it's quite funny that every time someone deconverted and they're new to this thing, especially if you're in an enclosed Christian community, you think that you're the only one. You always think that way. Yeah, I mean, I remember it was LANT, I think, and they said that they thought that they invented the word deconversion. Which is kind of the same in the Philippines. There are a lot of people we met when I was still in PATAS, or the Philippine Atheist and Agnostic Society. A lot of kids there thought that they're the only ones, that they were the only atheists in the Philippines, that they invented this train of thought or something.
It's hilarious. And I mean, obviously I didn't invent it. That term's been around for a while, and you know, it is really funny though, because you're in kind of a bubble and you're in like a closed group. You don't really realize, that other people all over the world have experienced very similar things.
You really don't realize how big the world is after that.
Yeah. But thank you for saying that about the podcast. And
Yes.
yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of power in people just telling their stories and and showing that it ends well, it's positive, it's a really big learning experience when people go through this transition in their life, and we learn so much about ourselves and about the world when we go through this deconversion.
Yes.
So thank you again, Rick. I appreciate your time, and really had a great time getting to know you and hearing your story.
Okay, thank you very much. It's the same with me. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, check out our newsletter at bodpodcast.com.